just turn my volume all the way down.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our speaker series this evening. I'm very proud to present to you Reverend Will Mccarvey. We've known each other for the last 6 years or more after I came to Pleasant Hill. Reverend Will is the Executive Director of Interfaith Council. We have this wonderful opportunity to meet together every first Thursday of the month. He always participates in the meeting with the pastors of Pleasant Hill and always a great presence. He works with churches, faith institutions, pastors, other religious leaders across the county and beyond on so many issues, especially on social justice, racial justice, hunger, poverty, homelessness, inclusion, and so much more. But we are in the season of Advent, preparing for Christmas. And this Advent is so different from other Advents we have had. And we don't even know how Christmas is going to look like. And so I invited my personal friend. I know him personally, and he lives the times. He is very, very aware of what is happening in our society, the pain, the struggles of people, the hardship. And so I'm going to ask Mr. Will to share with us what he feels, his own thoughts, his childhood memories maybe, what it means to celebrate Advent right now and leading to Christmas. And he can go from there to other concepts as interfaith, the activities that they do. And if you have questions, feel free to send those questions to Will. You have seen, our community has seen Will. If you haven't seen, then you can call yourself a proud CTK. Having said that, Will, I want to pass it on to you, and yeah, it's all yours.
Thank you, Father Paulson. It's my pleasure to be here today, and it's great to be able to have this chance to think about Advent in a new way, and especially during this time during COVID-19. I didn't grow up with Advent. I grew up a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they don't do Lent or Advent or liturgical seasons in the same way that Catholic and mainline Protestant Christians do. But growing up, Christmas was always a special time, gathering with family, a lot of preparation time, getting ready for it. And when I became a Protestant Christian in my early 20s, it was a little different for me to experience the whole liturgical year and times of preparation like Lent, and Advent being one of those times of the beginning of the liturgical year, and really thinking about how do I prepare myself for Christmas in a new way. It's grown deeper and deeper over the last, I guess it's been about, this year it's 30 years of being Protestant Christian, as I like to say. I'm trying to put the protest back into Protestantism. I spent a little time as an American Baptist, but it was a highly liturgical American Baptist church in Salt Lake City, Utah. And then I became the youth director at First Presbyterian Church in downtown Salt Lake City. So not quite the smells and bells that you may be familiar with, but higher mainline Protestant church kind of background. And I've served as a minister at the Community Presbyterian Church in Pittsburgh, California since 2004, so it's been 16 years as a professional minister, and it's an ecumenical community, United Church of Christ and Presbyterian Church USA. So Advent has become quite meaningful, and also a time for really hearing those songs, sometimes from the musicals, preparing the way of the Lord, and hearing those scriptures from Isaiah and those messages of comfort but also challenge. So Advent has become much more deeply theological for me, especially having preached on Advent and into Christmas and into Christmastide and Epiphany, and really viewing it as a whole season rather than just a day as I had grown up with it. So the 12 days of Christmas, growing up was a lot of thinking of those 12 days before Christmas, but ever, since joining the more liturgical forms of Christianity, really thinking of this whole time as a season, and those 12 days between Christmas and Epiphany have been quite important. And really looking for where God is coming in the world each year, I think, is a beneficial portion of Advent. And this year it's a little harder because I'm not out and about like I normally am. I'm normally driving around to meetings in weeks like this. this morning we had our elected council meeting and we talked about the UN Human Rights Day, and asked people, what are some of the human rights issues that you work on and why? And that was an important conversation. But just a year ago, we had a program at Mount Diablo UU Church to learn more about what was going on in Kashmir and the plight of the Uyghur Muslims, and learning about what life is like for other people, and especially with the struggles around poverty. And I think what we're seeing this year is so different and so out of our norms, that one of the things that I did in preparation for Advent preaching on the last Sunday of November for the first Sunday of Advent was I actually looked up online, how did people survive? What did the churches do in 1918 with the Spanish flu and the pandemic that was coming during that time? How did they respond? Were people also against wearing face masks? Because I think there were face mask laws passed in San Francisco during that time, and there were even shelter-in-place orders, and churches were not allowed to meet, synagogues weren't allowed to meet. So many of the things that we have taken for granted over the last 100 years, our ancestors and predecessors also went through 100 years ago during the time of the Spanish flu. And just trying to understand how at least we're able to communicate electronically and we're able to do our meetings over Zoom. They had none of that. So I wonder if families and if congregations maybe printed up different little papers where families could do their worship in their own home. And I've heard of some denominations encouraging just that the family themselves would lead a worship service for themselves, and they would use that as their time for family worship and scripture reading and maybe even singing. And 100 years ago, a lot of people learned to play the piano because that was one of the few ways you could entertain yourself as a family, was singing around your piano. And if you didn't have one member of your family, it would be difficult for you to be able to have music in your life unless you were able to go out some other place. So so much is at our fingertips today, whether it's on our telephones or our smartphones or even our computers, that help us be able to survive this time. But I think that we're still experiencing a lot of the same loneliness. And I think, I don't know that we've had a real chance to grieve as a culture. We've had so many deaths, and especially for those folks that have had loss in their family, if they weren't able to do a funeral, or if they weren't able, or if they've been putting it off, thinking that they'll celebrate the life of that loved one once this is all over, hoping that it comes sooner rather than later, I'm afraid we've put off a lot of the grief work that we probably need to be doing. And part of that is because we're not seeing the people who are dying. And our media has kind of protected us from a lot of that. We see some of the struggles that folks are going through as our ICU wards are filling up, and even this season, as our own county has increased its shelter-in-place restrictions, it's important for us to grieve. We've had a lot of loss. It's not just the loss of freedom, it's the loss of the loved ones, it's the loss of what it means to be community. As someone who sings in my church's choir, our musical director tried to get us to do a virtual choir together, and I am so out of practice. I can sing pretty well if it's in my kind of talking voice realm, but oftentimes I sing the bass part in my choir, and I didn't have the range that I used to have to be able to get to some of those lower notes. And so that's a loss for me as well, just not being able to sing the same way that I'm used to, or being able to feel the vibration of music and other voices around me as I try to sing. Now it's very artificial as we try to sing our single part that might be put together in a virtual choir so that it can be shared with our community on a Sunday morning or even on a Christmas Eve. Just doing that separately, knowing that someone else is going to take my voice and meld it into a choir is one thing, but the very act of singing itself is one of those spiritual practices that has really kept me going in ministry for years. And so it's that's one of the things that I struggle with the most. What do you struggle with the most? What do you miss the most? What do you grieve? Might be a good question for us in Advent. And as we think about this time, what had become so normal that you don't want to be normalized any longer? I think this is a time of life where we can ask that question and we can try to prioritize what's going to be most important for us when we come out of this as well. How are we going to be different? How are we going to live our lives different? And how are we going to have to set boundaries for other people that are used to us showing up in certain ways or doing certain things that we no longer feel called to do? And that might be something that this Advent helps us to consider as well. And then, of course, just thinking about how is Christ showing up in my life? How does the Christ child show up in me in ways that others can experience as well? I think that's an important question of our preparation through these days of Advent as well. Advent is not as long as Lent. There was some cultures, and I've been doing a lot of study on Celtic Christianity lately and trying to understand how the Celts accepted the Christian tradition and what they kept from their own cultural traditions and what they merged and melded into their own unique form of Christianity. And in the 6th century, apparently, they tried a 40-day time of Advent, like Lent, 40 days of preparation into this time. And I think they were used to seasons because as pagan practitioners beforehand, they would have had 4 major holidays and 4 lesser holidays and seasons of preparation for the harvest festivals and for a lot of the other celebrations that they would have had. But it's interesting to think of this time as preparation. And what if our Advent started before Thanksgiving? How would that change Thanksgiving? How would we be even more thankful, or how would that influence the way that we start our preparation with gratefulness before we even are allowed to move into the more somber preparation for the coming of the Christ? And how do we look for that coming of the Christ in our lives in different ways? So sometimes I come up with more questions than I do answers, and that's kind of typical of my spirituality as a progressive Christian Protestant. And especially during this time, the other thing that I've been keeping an eye on is hearing the reports from our food bank and hearing that there's twice as many people who are coming to our food banks around the county, and that the need is so much greater. We do have some good eviction protections, but even those will need to be extended to protect families so that they can stay in their homes. But how do we help those families that need better broadband Wi-Fi connections so their kids don't fall behind in school? How do we make sure folks aren't living with food insecurity, and there's so much stigma around that. How do we break down the stigma of all of those systems that offer help so that folks don't have to ask for as much help as that might get in the way of them being able to receive the help that they need? How can we help families that are at risk of losing their apartment or losing their home that they've been paying into for so many years? And then how do we elevate the faith community's voice of advocacy with our elected leaders to make sure that no one gets left behind? Those are some of the questions that I have as I come to this moment, especially as we're in another lockdown situation.
You know, Mr. Will, all of us pastors are struggling with these same questions. How to make Advent relevant, we are not even now, Christ the King churches right now, we are gearing towards this weekend. We are going to celebrate the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, because one of the things that we deliberately chose to do, we don't have a Spanish community with Christ the King, but seeing the need, seeing that they do not have much opportunities in the pandemic, we opened one service for them every Sunday. And then they brought us this tremendous gift that Christ the King Church has never celebrated really well, which is the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And so this weekend we are going to do a full mariachi outdoors with a beautiful bilingual mass, Spanish and English, and Spanish singing. And after the mass, the mariachis will continue to play. And I told people to bring some Patron, some tequila, and have some good time. But there's so many uncertainties. Sunday is probably going to be washed out, and we have to deal with it. But I think I love what you said. What are you grieving during the season? I am very much touched by that, because the whole thing about Christmas is just that Jesus came to take our grief, our pain, our suffering away. He came to give us comfort, or rather He came to accompany us on this journey of struggle and hardship. But one of the things I realized about Reverend Will is the fact that this pandemic has not slowed down his social justice ministry. It has not stopped him from getting pastors together, from getting various volunteers and folks together in talking about the issues that you talked, whether it's hunger, poverty, loneliness, racial justice. And I great admiration for that. I mean, you keep us all together. So my question to you is, talk to us something about Interfaith Council, and what do you do? What are the thrusts of the Interfaith Council?
Well, we have a lot of different kinds of programs. We have we spun the Winter Nights program into an independent 501c3 just this last July. I still attend a lot of the Homeless Summit meetings to keep up with how they're able to serve the families that they've been serving for the last 16 years, and so excited to see how they're able to grow as a new independent 501c3 and nonprofit. One of the things that we've done since we've learned that they wanted to become more independent and needed to be able to really focus on that part of their ministry is we had this great idea from Terry Moss, who's our vice president and vice chair of our governing board, and we've been running with it ever since. We call it iCare, where we've been encouraging teams from different congregations to come together to meet the needs of different agencies and families here in our county.
Let me just stop you there, since you're talking about iCare. Just recently, our Christ the King representative, Carolyn Peters, who attends the meetings with you, she actually emailed me yesterday, and I approved. You wanted 2 congregations to come together and put together boxes for the homeless people. I think 250 boxes, and we said Christ the King Church will support you with 50% of that, and we'll offer our wonderful tent outdoors so that volunteers can come and put that together. And then just to reiterate on winter nights, this is a very sad year for us because we are not able to house them at Christ the King Church. However, our neighbor, Church of the Resurrection, is going to do it, and so we have assured $5,000 towards the Winter Nights program. Plus, we will supply them food for the entire week. And we'll work with the list, we'll work with the church, whether they want us to order food from the restaurants or they can just pay whoever is doing it. But I just wanted to know, we are going to assist in these two programs. Keep talking.
That's great. And iCare as a program is really bringing folks together from different traditions, not only so that we can serve together, but so we can actually learn about each other and go deeper in our interfaith relations as we do so. So it started in August. It started with a pilot program creating hygiene kits that the county's homeless core teams can take to people that are living without shelter on the streets. And we've had two of those groups, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Sufism Reoriented, Lafayette Orinda Presbyterian Church, San Ramon Valley United Methodist Church have worked on some of these hygiene kits. This is the first time we're creating food kits with this project that Christ the King is participating in, and we're so glad that you're one of our co-sponsors for that. And then we're also looking at how we had some congregations do a part of a Thanksgiving food drive for Monument Crisis Center. Some of the interfaith women's circles with the Neighbor to Neighbor group in Rinda and San Ramon Valley have come together to make breakfast packets for the clients that come in and out of the Trinity Center and use their programming on a regular basis in Walnut Creek. Our Sikh, we welcomed a new Sikh temple into the Interfaith Council this morning from Bay Point, the Bay Point Sikh Temple, and they provided all of the Christmas gifts for the families that are in the Mountain View shelter that is run by Shelter Inc. And just trying to match the needs in the county as we hear about them with the communities that can make the difference. We recognized Monument Crisis Center and Trinity Center for their good work, but we also recognized the Greater Richmond Interfaith Program in Richmond, which is one of the oldest interfaith programs in the whole Bay Area. They started in 1967, and they have a homeless shelter, transitional housing, food. They're even operating the old Marriott Hotel as transitional housing for folks that are in need of shelter, with 200 people living in that hotel that they're operating for the county. And they just do amazing work in West County and partner with other agencies from around the county as well. We have a new project. We're looking for folks in East County to help with some food for the folks that are in the Opportunity Junction program. So iCare is really looking and trying to look at what are the needs in the county and how do we organize our congregations to be able to make the difference like you are in these programs that Father Paulson mentioned already. And so that's one of the biggest things that's kind of new that folks are working on together.
I just want to say, as you're talking, number of our parishioners want to say how much they're appreciating the conversation we are having. Maggie says, thank you, Will, for being here to share today. You always inspire me. Another Chris Petran says, grief is certainly a palpable weight the whole community is bearing. Others, we've been looking forward to this conversation. So our community is really, really appreciating this conversation. Let me ask you one question. I know you do lots. Tell our church about how you bring together so many faiths, whether it's the Sufis or the Islam community, various Christian denominations, the Jewish community. How you keep all this together under this banner?
Well, sometimes it's with the local regional groups like the Pleasant Hill Clergy Group that gets together monthly and also does some projects together. We have an Interfaith San Ramon Valley that does some programming together. Neighbor to Neighbor is in the Lafayette Orinda area. And we have an East County United that hasn't been as busy since we did the big march after the arson at the Islamic Center of the East Bay in 2007. But still gathers to, the religious leaders to be able to support one another. A part of it is just getting around and listening for what are the needs in the community, and then encouraging the folks in our congregations to make the difference that we know that you want to make. And one of the projects we've had since before we were interfaith. We began as the Council of Churches in 1960, and it was mostly mainline Protestants back then. They didn't allow Catholics or Mormons or other kinds of Christians in, or the Jews or Unitarian Universalists or Muslims. So when we became interfaith in 1998, that really broadened the amount of communities that we could be in dialogue with. So everything that we do starts with dialogue. So in our elected council meeting this morning, we had an interfaith dialogue about what are those human rights issues that are most important to us, and how do we share the intersectionalities of all of those with each other so that we can make a difference in the world. And out of that interfaith dialogue comes this heart for service and this heart for getting to know the differences that we have and the distinctions that we have that mean so much to us, and learning how and why that it makes the difference in other people's lives. And the more we get to know each other, the more we're able to really live into what does it mean to be a caring community. So one of the earliest ministries that the Council of Churches had was community chaplaincy. And over the years, at one point we had 5.5 full-time equivalents of chaplains in this county. And as the hospitals professionalized their chaplains, some of those positions went away. As the chaplaincy at the county jail went to a different group, we've continued to have our interfaith juvenile chaplain at Juvenile Hall, and right now we have Reverend Julius Van Hook in that position, serving so well the young people who may have gone through a hard time in their life and need the help to be able to make the changes necessary for them to be able to lead a more fruitful life. And one of the newer things that we've done is we've just created an I Change committee that will help Julius in his work, but also train mentors to be able to walk with the young people who are coming out of juvenile hall who want to make that change in their life. And we'll train these mentors, do the background checks necessary for them to be able to do that work, and then we'll be able to encourage them to make the difference in the lives of those young people that they're working with. So the I Change program, we have an interfaith climate action network. We have other like interfaith holidays that we do, like the International Day of Peace on September 21st, World Interfaith Harmony Week, which is always February 1st through 7th, and I think we had a concert here to celebrate World Interfaith Harmony Week a couple of years ago. So sometimes we'll do interfaith concerts, sometimes we'll bring in speakers to do educational programs. Since the lockdown, and especially since the murder of George Floyd, we've been doing a lot of anti-racism training and putting out a lot of anti-racism resources on our website that you can still find at interfaithccc.org. And one of the blessings of COVID-19 is that even It looks like we're still on Facebook, but can you see me now? Yeah? So we put a lot of the anti-racism trainings and encouragement for congregations to do 21-day racial equity challenges on our website. And we've tried to inspire. It says there's no memory card.
It's okay.
But we're good? Okay. So, yeah, we've just been trying to help resource the faith community to be able to live into what we know is our calling, and that's to take care of the poor, to walk with the strangers and those that are outcast. And in some ways, you know, Our Lady of Guadalupe is one of those figures that really lives into the Magnificat. And I'll be preaching on the Magnificat in my community this Sunday. And what a radical prayer for turning the world upside down. And if that's God's heart, that kind of world, then we have a lot of work to do to be able to help transform the world into that place where the outcasts are welcome, where the poor always have a place at the welcome table, and we are recreating the world into this kingdom of God that Jesus preached so often. And if we're inspired by Mary, the mother of Jesus, the Theotokos in the Orthodox tradition, or even in the expression with Our Lady of Guadalupe, as I see the picture and the tapestry here on the wall here in the chapel at Christ the King, the heart of God is about radical inclusion and turning the world upside down into a place where everyone belongs, and even upsetting those systems that continue to separate us and profit off of our lives. So whether we're a young indigenous person looking up and seeing a vision of Our Lady, or a young Latinx person living with COVID in one of the cities that has the highest rates of Latinx COVID here in Contra Costa, and that's Oakley, of all places, has among the highest COVID rates for Latinx people. We, as Christians, are called to be a part of the tearing down of those systems that oppress, doing our own anti-racism work, recreating our own churches into community centers that allow us to be able to question the things that have become normalized in our world. And I think this Advent season can be a real radical time for us Christians to be able to catch this new vision of the new world that God wants to make. And it starts here.
You know, I have a question to you. I know over the past year you've been working very hard on bringing people together and training them in having a civil, meaningful conversation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, we've been doing that for some time. Interfaith Dialogue has a way of encouraging us to be in conversation with people that are very different from us and not to make assumptions about them. This is something actually I think I've learned more from the pagan community than any other faith community, is the ability to not make assumptions about what other people believe just based on how they describe themselves or what kind of language they use to describe themselves, or categories. And it's one thing to know that someone's a Christian. It's another thing to know just how that form of Christianity has influenced them to be who they are. And to go deeper not only in our own religion to be able to understand others, but also to be able to listen for where Spirit or the divine might be communicating in between the different ways and expressions that we experience Christ in our own life, or the Spirit or the divine as well. So I think, interfaith and being in interfaith conversation and dialogue is it can be so challenging If you come at it with a posture that I'm gonna share what I believe with other people and hope that they just accept what I believe, and that really doesn't work very much in interfaith circles. But if we come to these conversations in ways that allow us to listen to the lives of other people and learn whatever it is that we are able to learn from them in that moment, then we too can learn even more deeper things about our own faith tradition that we might not have been able to recognize yet. One of the great experiences I've had was learning more about Eastern Orthodoxy and just the beautiful mysticism, especially in monastic Eastern Orthodoxy. And one of the places that I visited when I was in Israel, in Palestine, was this monastery up on the hillside that you can see from the city of Jericho. And it's the monastery of the Great Temptation. It's an Eastern Orthodox monastery. And the day that we took the gondola up there and knocked on the door, the priest was a Canadian Eastern Orthodox priest. And he was spending a few months there as a part of his rest and renewal, but it also meant that as a part of the community that he would sometimes answer the door and give a brief tour of this space. And the use of icons was actually something I studied in seminary, how to pray with icons. At my Presbyterian seminary, you may not realize that there are courses like that in ecumenical seminaries like the Graduate Theological Union that we're a part of, but my seminary was also the first one to have a Catholic sister as our dean. And because there's so much cross-fertilization in our studies, it can give us a greater appreciation for the other traditions that we come in contact with. So being able to see the iconostasis and the special ways that people were praying in this this monastery that was built basically into the side of the mountain with a facade that protected it from the elements, but still included that stark desert spirituality. Just a powerful, powerful day to be able to learn more about what perhaps the Desert Fathers experienced in early Christianity and what influenced that form of spirituality that continues to find its strands in every portion of Christianity. Every time we come together to do fasting or prayer, to be able to recognize that part of our spirituality as well, and how central our practices themselves are to the calming of our hearts so that we might be able to be the presence we want to be for other people. So
thank you for that. Chris writes, not making assumptions about people we do not know. She took it from you.
Hey, if we could be honest in our own congregations, we might recognize the greater diversity within our own congregations, let alone our own traditions.
And then, what an amazing amount of work you do for social justice, serving the needy. Betty says, final question, we are coming to a close. If you can talk a minute or two about your own calling as a pastor, your own calling to do so much good that you do in our society, that'll be a wonderful way to end this conversation.
So, yeah, my spiritual journey has taken me all over the world. And lately I've been saying that I'm on my fourth spiritual journey. And for all the things that I learned in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, one of the things that still comes and still informs me is how well they take care of their own. And I wish my Protestant Christian siblings would do as well as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does in taking care of the folks that are struggling in their tradition. And as I've spent time with people in other traditions, I've always I've always come away with some appreciation, whether it was Jewish liturgy and knowing just enough Hebrew to be dangerous, but being in a Jewish synagogue and reciting the chants and getting lost in the mysticism of the moment, or walking the labyrinth, or being able to be a part of a community that sees the possibilities in the world that I think especially we're challenged with in these seasons of Advent, that God really does have a desire to make the world into a better place. I had a strong conversion to the gospel of grace, and with that came a call to be a pacifist, but also a strong call to make the world a better place, and that social justice was primary to the calling of someone who claims to follow Jesus. And that comes in the prayer of Mary, it comes in the calling in the preaching of Peter and Paul, and in many ways, even from a young boy, I was the networker in my community. If there was a new person, I was often among the first people to go make friends with them and introduce them to others, and sometimes they would become friends with other people and would rarely hang out with me anymore, but that just was a part of my my calling as a person and my ability to network. So, you know, a lot of the work that I do is convening, welcoming people to get together to talk about how we might address the real needs of our neighbors. And one of the upcoming events that we're inviting folks, anyone from Christ the King is welcome to be a part of this, but on Wednesday, January 6th at 7 p.m. we're hosting an Interfaith Food Insecurity Roundtable, and we'll have some folks from the Food Bank and Doug Holmes from Multi-Faith Action Coalition, who's been working on food insecurity for the last 6 or 7 years with multi-faith, and hopefully congregations and members of congregations that are working on food insecurity in many different ways will be able to come together, and we'll share our ideas. Next week, there's a group in West County that you may not have heard about that for the last 5 or 6 years they've been gathering food and distributing it through the Richmond Unified School District to all of the families that are most at risk of not having food over the Christmas break. And they're going to be organizing it, and our new president, Erica Baines, has been organizing it all week. And so people that are Christian and Jewish and Sikh and Muslim from every racial and economic class come together to be able to make that happen. And they come back every year because they want to make sure that no one's going to be hungry again. And I think that living into that call of Mother Mary to be a part of the not just the redistribution, but a part of this transformation of the world that God is about, that's what excites me.
Thank you, Will, for this great conversation. We learned so much about you. We appreciate all that you do. We appreciate for bringing together the clergy, the faith leaders for county and beyond, and taking care of especially our...
And I appreciate Christ the King community, and thank you for your generosity, but even more the hard work that so many of you do to make the world a better place. And we're glad that you're a part of our council and continue to make the difference that you can here in this county.
Thank you so much, and thanks again for joining our conversation. I've been having this conversation with Mr. Will Mccarvey. He's the Executive Director of Interfaith Council. He also works very closely with the Multi-Faith Coalition and myriads of other non-profit religious organizations in and around the county. Thank you, and I hope to see you join us tomorrow evening for our Advent Reconciliation service, which is live streamed at 7 p.m. Thank you, and have a